They weren't invented for this style of living. They weren't thought about in 1948. I bet you guys want human right number 31 now. Most of the conversation that's ongoing is around privacy, not property. And I believe we can use blockchain to test the hypothesis that my data is my property. And if it is my property, really interesting things can happen. You can donate your property. Your property can get stolen. This is my favorite car to drive. One of the reasons I love driving this car is because it is the opposite of autonomous driving. Like, there are no systems in it. It's actually kind of dangerous to operate this thing. But it's my property. If it gets stolen, I can go to a local police station and I can file a report because someone stole my car. Do you think that you could go to a local police station and file a report that someone stole your GPS data and is selling it in secondary and tertiary markets so that you can get real-time ads when you pass by Starbucks so they can tell you that they have coffee for sale? You can't. Now, we understand property very well. We do understand information as property as well. There is intellectual property, which is if I draw something, it's my property. I have intellectual property. But if it's inherent data from me, apparently it's not covered. For example, your fingerprint is not your property. I'll give you a really interesting thought experiment. Draw your fingerprint and then go to a lawyer and ask them whether that's your property or not. Poof. It will implode. So I believe that we should test this hypothesis that every human being owns their data forever. And said data is categorized as property as the 31st human right. Now, how do you build a decentralized human right using blockchain? We know how to build it centralized. It takes about 100 years. You have to go to the United Nations. You have to get everyone to agree. You have to spend a lot of money. You have to do a lot of dinners. Then you have to deal with the lobby, who will argue that the data is actually theirs. How do you build it in a decentralized way? Well, we saw what the first experiment was. We used currency innovation with the notion of computer science, and we were able to build a decentralized currency. I think most of you will agree that it is inevitable that some crypto-built currency will reach the sanctity and fidelity of fiat. I believe we can use contract innovation coupled with computer science to agree on what the 31st human right is. Now, what do I mean by contract innovation? All contracts have a begin and an end. All contracts have a way out. Most of the laws that are in place today have a corridor for every single one of us to go to those who are using our data right now and say, hey, I'm okay with you selling my data for the last 20 years, no hard feelings, but from this day onwards, you can't do it anymore because I am stating that this is my property. Most contracts have a method for you to opt out. The contracts you have with Facebook, the contracts you have with LinkedIn, the contracts you have with your doctor, the contracts you have with your hospital, all those things that you sign, there are methods for you to opt out. The question is, can 200 to 300 million of us do it in the same way on a blockchain with cryptographic evidence that that's what we believe, and as a thundering herd declare a 31st human right with no need for the United Nations? That's the big blockchain use case. That's what blockchain does. We're all distracted with the next ICO and the next cryptocurrency, and that's okay, because there's always copycats. But if you really want to take advantage of blockchain, you have to think about what is the next thing that we're going to decentralize. The question is going to be, how do we self-order? Decentralization is fantastic, but you have to learn how to self-order. And there are methods in the protocol that can help us accelerate that. I believe that if we were to go on this road and test this hypothesis, we would forget that there are ICOs, and we will start to think about the IRRs. Or maybe we'll call it something different. IRR doesn't have that ring to it. But the individual renegotiated right, declaring your data as property. I believe that a platform like that, just like we see dozens of currencies that are crypto built that will reach the sanctity and fidelity of fiat currency, I believe that a platform like that will trigger and inspire others to build other human rights, not just the 31st. We might actually be able to build a whole 30 new human rights in the next 100 years, while it took us 2,500 years to build the last 30. The difference is these are going to be decentralized by design. Those were centralized. And we can actually create an entirely new operating model of how we exist. Rights that make sense. I'm sure it made sense that I need rest in 1948. I'm sure it made sense that I should not be tortured in the 1800s. But it also makes sense today that my data is my property. And as a result, when it's used, I should receive consideration for it. If you remember one thing from this talk, remember that this t-shirt is magical. It has two magic powers. I can talk to it, and anytime this t-shirt is used in the future, it has the ability to show us what's happening with it. I'm going to talk to it right now. There, are you on? Okay. Well, I'm going to show the audience what I'm going to do with you in the future, and then I'm going to ask you to show us what the future looks like. You cool with that? It says just get on with the show. What I'm going to do with this t-shirt is when I get back home, I'm going to give it to my 3-month-old son. I'm going to give it to Akash. And I'm going to say, Akash, I want you to pass this t-shirt on to your kids with the instructions that they should pass it on to their kids. You have to pick one and pass it on. So hopefully find some sort of grandchild of mine and pass this t-shirt on, and then have that grandchild pass that t-shirt on to one of my great-grands. Because I want to show this audience today what the future looks like. Are you ready? It says get on with the show. So I want you to show us something in the future that will make sense. What do you want to show us? He wants to show us 3 hours from now. Why? Because I'll be drinking? No, they're not interested in that. Show us something that's relevant. 2118. Interesting. The t-shirt is being worn in 2118, 100 years from now. It's being worn by my great-granddaughter. Apparently her name is Neelam. And the United Nations has an event celebrating the 60th human right that was built decentralized, and they're interviewing her. Are you sure this is going to work? Let's get on with the show.
I'm so thrilled to be here today. I can't even believe that we are already at 60 human rights. In just 100 years, we have defined, implemented, and agreed on an additional 30 human rights, when in the past it took us over 5,000 years just to get the first 30 down. This t-shirt is a representation of where it all started, human right number 31. The right to own your own data as property and be remunerated fairly when it was used by others. My great-grandfather, Richie Etwaru, was a total badass. Like, he was one of those guys who operated his own car and everything. He presented his vision that we need more than just 30 human rights at a TED Talk. Back then, they had these things called TED and TEDx, which were weird to us now, but I guess back then they served a purpose. So basically, people would stand in these dark rooms on peculiar red dots and talk in this overly passionate and corny way, just to be recorded by a few 2D cameras, and they had a live audience, don't ask. Nonetheless, this is how our great-grandparents in their generation spread the word about new revelations back then. This t-shirt reminds me of my great-grandfather and the initial case that data from that human should be owned by them as their own personal property, and then when it's used by others, they should be remunerated fairly for that. I mean, I can't even believe that before the United Nations adopted Article 31, our great-grandparents were being mined and farmed for data and insight without their awareness, so these companies could go and make hundreds of billions of you. Like, it wasn't bad enough that they were already allowed to do all these dangerous things like operate their own cars or stand in dark rooms on little red dots and talk in these overly passionate and corny ways just to get people to listen to them. Our great-grandparents and their whole generation were being mined for data and insight without their consent or awareness about any of that. And they were never getting paid for that.
So my line here is, isn't my great-granddaughter adorable? Ladies and gentlemen, blockchain's biggest use cases allow us to test hypotheses. And we can test hypotheses about things that were built in a centralized way and explore whether they can exist in a decentralized manner or not. Just like we did with currencies. To facilitate crypto-built currencies, I give you the crypto-built right. Thank you very much.